I watched through my binoculars as $4 million worth of luxury resort property turned into a muddy wasteland. The pristine lake that had sparkled like diamonds just hours before was now nothing but cracked earth and stranded boats sitting like beached whales in the sun. The HOA president stood at the edge of what used to be her million-dollar waterfront view, screaming into her phone at lawyers who could not help her now. Her perfectly manicured hands shook as she realized her dream resort was finished. 6 months ago, these same people had destroyed my grandfather's bridge with bulldozers while I watched helplessly from my own property. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. But they made one critical mistake. They never bothered to research who really controlled the water that made their investment possible. That is when I realized I held the power to drain their entire world dry. My name is David, and for 32 years I lived in paradise. My great-grandfather had built our family cabin on the shores of Crystal Lake back in 1890, long before anyone even dreamed of HOAs or luxury resorts. The property had been passed down through 4 generations, and every morning I woke up to the most beautiful view in the county. The lake stretched out like a mirror, reflecting the pine trees and mountains that surrounded our little slice of heaven. My grandfather had built a wooden bridge connecting our property to the main road, hand-cutting every plank and driving every nail himself. That bridge was not just transportation. It was family history, crafted with love and built to last forever. I would cross that bridge every morning on my way to work, feeling the familiar creak of the weathered planks under my feet. The sound had become as comforting as a heartbeat. Some mornings, mist would rise from the water, and I would stop halfway across just to breathe in the peace and quiet. Our little community was perfect in its simplicity. The Johnsons lived across the cove and would wave from their dock every evening. Old Mr. Peterson had a small fishing boat that puttered around the lake at sunrise, never catching much but always smiling. Kids from the neighborhood would swim off the rocks during summer, their laughter echoing across the water. This was not just property to me. This was sacred ground where my family had created memories for over a century. My grandfather had proposed to my grandmother on that bridge. My father had taught me to fish from those same weathered planks. I had planned to teach my own children there someday. The lake was the heartbeat of our community. Crystal clear water that you could see bottom in 12 feet deep. Fish jumped at sunset, creating ripples that caught the golden light. Families would picnic on the shores, children would skip stones, and teenagers would have their first kisses under the stars reflected in the still water. But things were changing. Construction equipment had appeared on the far shore about a year earlier. Surveyors with their bright orange vests and fancy equipment walked around with clipboards, pointing and measuring. The rumor mill in our small community was spinning stories about development, about rich investors from the city who wanted to build something big. I tried not to worry. Our property had been here longer than anyone could remember. We had clear title, property taxes paid every year without fail, and rights that went back over a century. Whatever they were building over there could not possibly affect us. I was wrong, dead wrong. The first sign of trouble came on a Tuesday morning in March. I was having my coffee on the porch, watching the sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink, when I saw the white truck pull up to my driveway. A woman in a business suit climbed out, carrying a clipboard and wearing the kind of smile that never reaches the eyes. She knocked on my door with the confidence of someone who was used to getting what she wanted. When I opened it, she handed me an official-looking envelope with letterhead that read Crystal Lake Homeowners Association. I had never heard of any homeowners association. Our little community had always been informal, neighbors helping neighbors without any need for rules or fees or people in suits telling us what we could do with our own land. That envelope would change everything. The letter inside that envelope felt like a declaration of war written in legal language. The Crystal Lake Homeowners Association claimed jurisdiction over all waterfront structures and improvements within their newly established boundaries. My family bridge, which had stood for over 50 years, was listed as a non-compliant structure requiring immediate remediation. I read the letter 3 times, each time feeling more confused and angry. How could a homeowners association that did not even exist when my grandfather built that bridge suddenly have authority over my family property? We had been here for over a century. They had been here for 5 minutes. The letter was signed by someone named Patricia Whitman, HOA president, with a phone number and address I did not recognize. I called immediately, my hands shaking with anger as I dialed. Crystal Lake HOA, Patricia speaking. Her voice was crisp, professional, and cold as winter ice. This is David Morrison. I just received your letter about my bridge, and there has to be some mistake. My family has owned this property since 1890. We predate any HOA by decades. Mr. Morrison, I understand your confusion, but property age does not exempt structures from current safety and aesthetic standards. Your bridge poses both a safety hazard and an eyesore that negatively impacts property values for our resort development. Resort development, there it was. This was not about safety or community standards. This was about money. Ma'am, that bridge has been safe for 50 years. My grandfather built it to last, and it has never hurt anyone. As for aesthetics, it fits the natural character of the lake perfectly. Mr. Morrison, I have reviewed the county safety reports, and your structure fails to meet current engineering standards. Additionally, it blocks the pristine lake views that our resort guests expect. We are prepared to offer compensation for voluntary removal, but one way or another, that bridge is coming down. I hung up before I said something I would regret. My blood was boiling, and my hands were shaking with rage. These people had been here less than a year, and they thought they could tear down my family history for their profit margins. I spent the next week researching everything I could about HOAs and property rights. What I discovered made my stomach turn. The Crystal Lake HOA had been incorporated 6 months earlier by something called Mountain View Resort Development, LLC. They had purchased the large tract of land across the lake and were building a luxury resort with marina, golf course, and million-dollar vacation homes. Their marketing materials promised pristine lake views and exclusive waterfront living. Apparently, my grandfather's humble wooden bridge did not fit their vision of luxury. I hired a lawyer, thinking this would be simple to resolve. My property rights were clear, my family had been here forever, and the bridge predated their HOA by decades. Surely any judge would see reason. But Patricia Whitman and her HOA had deep pockets and connections I had never imagined. Within days of hearing my lawyer, I received notice that the county had received anonymous complaints about bridge safety. Suddenly, inspectors were demanding access to examine a structure that had never been inspected in 50 years of safe operation. The fix was in, the game was rigged, and I was about to learn just how dirty these people were willing to play. The county inspector arrived on a Thursday morning with an attitude that told me everything I needed to know. He spent less than 10 minutes looking at my bridge before declaring it structurally deficient and non-compliant with current safety codes. "Sir, this bridge has been here for over 50 years without a single incident," I protested. My grandfather built it strong enough to last centuries. He shrugged without looking up from his clipboard. Times change, Mr. Morrison. Safety standards change. This structure would never pass inspection under current regulations. What he did not say, but what we both knew, was that current regulations had been written for new construction, not historic family structures. It was like judging a 1950 truck by 2024 safety standards. Technically accurate but completely unfair. The inspection report became ammunition for the HOA's legal war machine. Patricia Whitman filed injunctions with the county, demanding immediate closure of my bridge pending full safety remediation. The legal fees started mounting faster than I could count. My lawyer, a decent man named Tom Bradley, explained the reality of fighting wealthy developers with unlimited legal budgets. David, they are not trying to win on merit. They are trying to bleed you dry with legal costs until you give up. But giving up meant losing my family legacy. It meant letting bulldozers destroy something my grandfather had built with his own hands. It meant these corporate bullies would win just because they had deeper pockets. The harassment escalated quickly. HOA security guards started patrolling near my property, taking photos and documenting every time I used my own bridge. They filed trespassing complaints when I walked on land my family had owned for over a century. Patricia Whitman herself showed up at my door one evening with a new offer. She was a tall woman in her 50s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of confident smile that came from never being told no. Mr. Morrison, this legal battle is costing both of us money. I am prepared to offer you $50,000 for voluntary bridge removal. That is more than fair compensation. Ma'am, that bridge is not for sale at any price. It is family history. Her smile never wavered, but her eyes turned cold. Mr. Morrison, you are fighting a battle you cannot win. Our resort represents a $12 million investment with political connections throughout the county. Your little wooden bridge is going to disappear one way or another. The only question is whether you walk away with money in your pocket or nothing at all. After she left, I sat on my porch staring at the bridge that had become the center of a war I never wanted to fight. The wooden planks glowed in the sunset, looking peaceful and innocent while lawyers and developers plotted its destruction. That night I could not sleep. I kept thinking about my grandfather's hands cutting those planks, about all the family moments that bridge had witnessed, about the injustice of losing something precious just because rich people wanted a better view. The final blow came 3 weeks later. Despite my lawyer's best efforts, the county granted a temporary injunction forcing me to stop using my bridge pending full legal resolution. Sheriff's deputies posted official notices on both ends, threatening arrest for anyone who crossed. I was now trapped on my own property, forced to drive 20 miles around the lake just to get to the main road. A trip to the grocery store that used to take 15 minutes now took over an hour. The HOA had effectively made my property nearly worthless while they dragged out legal proceedings that could last for years. Standing at the edge of my property that evening, staring at the yellow tape blocking access to my own bridge, I felt something break inside me. These people had declared war on my family history, and they were winning through money and corruption rather than justice. But wars can turn on a single battle, and I was about to discover that I had weapons they never knew existed. I woke up to the sound of diesel engines and hydraulic systems groaning to life. Through my bedroom window, I could see the convoy that would destroy my family legacy. 2 bulldozers, a crane truck, and a demolition crew wearing hard hats and safety vests. Patricia Whitman stood beside a sheriff's deputy, holding official court documents and wearing a triumphant smile. She had come to watch my grandfather's bridge die. I threw on clothes and ran outside, my heart pounding with panic and rage. The demolition crew was already setting up equipment, treating my family treasure like any other construction obstacle to be removed. "Stop, you cannot do this," I shouted, running toward the bridge. The sheriff's deputy stepped in front of me, his hand resting on his belt. "Mr. Morrison, I have a court order for demolition of this structure. You need to stay back or I will have to arrest you for interfering with a legal proceeding." "This is my property. That bridge belongs to my family." "Sir, the court has ruled this structure unsafe and non-compliant. Please step back." I felt completely helpless, watching strangers prepare to destroy something that had taken my grandfather months to build by hand. Every plank had been carefully selected, every joint precisely fitted, every nail driven with love and pride. Patricia Whitman walked over with her clipboard and legal papers, radiating satisfaction. "Mr. Morrison, this is unfortunate but necessary for community safety and progress. Our resort guests deserve pristine lake views, and frankly, your old bridge was an eyesore. That bridge has more character and history than your entire plastic resort will ever have." She laughed, a cold sound that made my blood boil. "Character does not increase property values, Mr. Morrison. Progress does. Beauty does. Modern amenities do. Your grandfather's little craft project simply does not fit our vision for Crystal Lake's future." The bulldozer operator climbed into his machine and fired up the engine. The sound was like a death knell, diesel exhaust mixing with the morning mist that still clung to the lake's surface. I watched in horror as the bulldozer's blade made contact with the first support post. 50 years of weathered wood splintered and cracked under the machine's weight. Each breaking beam felt like a physical blow to my chest. The wooden planks that I had walked across thousands of times began falling into the lake with splashes that seemed to echo forever. Pieces of my childhood, fragments of family history, floating away like broken dreams. The demolition took less than 20 minutes. 50 years of family heritage reduced to floating debris in the time it takes to drink a cup of coffee. The bulldozer operator worked efficiently, professionally, completely unaware that he was destroying something irreplaceable. When it was over, nothing remained except empty space where my grandfather's bridge used to connect my world to the outside. The wooden posts that had stood like faithful sentries for decades were gone. The planks that had supported 4 generations of my family were scattered across the lake's surface like broken bones. Patricia Whitman walked to the edge of my property, surveying the destruction with obvious satisfaction. "Much better. Now our resort guests will have unobstructed views of the natural beauty of Crystal Lake." She turned to me with that same cold smile. "Mr. Morrison, I hope you understand this was necessary. Sometimes progress requires difficult decisions. I am sure you will find a way to adapt." After they left, I stood alone at the edge of my property, staring at the empty space where my bridge used to be. Pieces of weathered wood still floated on the lake's surface, slowly drifting away with the current. That night, I sat on my porch with a bottle of whiskey and decades of family photos. Pictures of my grandfather building the bridge, my father teaching me to fish from those planks, family reunions, where cousins posed together on the wooden rails. All of it was gone, destroyed by people who saw dollar signs where I saw family history. But as I sat there in the darkness, staring at the lake that had been my family's sanctuary for over a century, something changed inside me. The grief was still there, but it was hardening into something else, something colder and more determined. They thought they had won, They thought they had broken me. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. I spent the next 3 weeks in the county records office, digging through dusty files and century-old documents with the obsession of a man who had lost everything. My grandfather always said knowledge was power, and I was about to discover just how right he was. The first breakthrough came in a file marked Water Rights, Crystal Lake District 1889. Inside were handwritten documents in faded ink, detailing the original land grants and water management agreements that established our lake community. My great-grandfather, Thomas Morrison, had not just been a settler. He had been the engineer who designed and built the entire dam system that created Crystal Lake in the first place. The lake was not natural at all, but a carefully engineered reservoir built to provide water for the growing community and lumber operations. According to the documents, Thomas Morrison had retained permanent water rights as compensation for his engineering work. Those rights had been passed down through the family deed, generation after generation, completely separate from the land ownership itself. I could barely breathe as I read the technical specifications in my great-grandfather's careful handwriting. The dam system included primary control gates, overflow channels, and emergency drainage systems. Most importantly, the documents specified that water rights holders had perpetual authority over flow management for property maintenance and community needs. But the real treasure was buried in a file marked Engineering Specifications, Morrison Dam Project 1890. Inside was a complete technical manual written by my great-grandfather, detailing every aspect of the dam's construction and operation. He had designed backup systems, overflow protocols, and detailed instructions for managing water levels during different seasons. The manual included hand-drawn maps showing the exact location of all control systems, including the master gates that could drain the entire lake if necessary. My great-grandfather had built the dam to last centuries, with multiple ways to control water flow for maintenance, flood prevention, and drought management. I spent another week with a water rights attorney named Margaret Chen, who specialized in historical property law. She reviewed all the documents with growing excitement. "David, this is incredible. Your family does not just own water rights to Crystal Lake. You basically own the lake itself. These documents predate any municipal authority by decades, and water rights law strongly favors historical precedent." What does that mean in practical terms? It means you have legal authority to manage lake water levels for legitimate property purposes. If you needed to drain the lake for dam maintenance, flood prevention, or to protect your property rights, these documents would support that action. Margaret explained that water rights were completely separate from land ownership and HOA jurisdiction. The resort development had purchased land around the lake, but they had never researched the underlying water rights that made their lakefront property valuable. They built a $12 million resort assuming the lake would always be there. But legally, you control whether it stays or goes. I felt something shift inside my chest, like a door opening in a room I had never known existed. All my life, I had seen myself as just another property owner around the lake. I had never realized that my family actually controlled the lake itself. That evening, I drove to the dam site for the first time in years. It was located about 2 miles upstream from the main lake, hidden in a canyon that most people never bothered to explore. The original stone and concrete structure still stood exactly as my great-grandfather had built it, weathered but solid after more than a century. I found the control house, a small building that housed the mechanical systems for managing water flow. Inside were the original brass wheels and lever systems that controlled the gates, plus newer electrical systems that had been added over the decades. Everything was exactly as described in my great-grandfather's manual. The primary gates that controlled normal water flow, the secondary gates for seasonal adjustments, and the emergency gates that could drain the entire lake if fully opened. I ran my hands over the brass control wheels, feeling the weight of history and power in those simple mechanical systems. My great-grandfather had built this place to last forever, never imagining his great-great-grandson would need it to fight a war against corporate bullies. But as I stood in that control house, surrounded by a century of engineering excellence, I realized I was not just David Morrison, the guy whose bridge got bulldozed. I was the heir to Thomas Morrison's legacy, the keeper of systems that could reshape the entire lake community. Patricia Whitman and her HOA had made one critical mistake. They had destroyed my bridge without ever researching who really controlled the water that made their investment possible. They were about to learn that some battles are won not with lawyers or bulldozers, but with knowledge, preparation, and the patience to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I arrived at the dam control house at 5:30 in the morning, when the lake was still covered in mist, and the world was quiet except for bird songs and the gentle sound of water flowing over the spillway. In my truck were copies of all the historical documents, my great-grandfather's engineering manual, and a thermos of coffee that would keep me alert for the long day ahead. The brass control wheels turned easier than I expected, well maintained by decades of county workers who had no idea they were operating my family's engineering legacy. According to the manual, opening the secondary gates halfway would lower lake levels by approximately 6 feet over 8 hours. Opening them fully would drain the lake to less than 20% capacity within 12 hours. I decided to start conservatively. This was not about destroying the lake permanently, but about exercising my legal water rights to protect my property interests and demonstrate who really controlled Crystal Lake. The mechanical systems responded perfectly to the original specifications. Water began flowing through the opened gates with increasing force, creating a rushing sound that echoed through the canyon. I could feel the power of engineered water flow, thousands of gallons per minute, responding to the turn of brass wheels my great-grandfather had installed over a century ago. By 7 in the morning, the lake level had dropped noticeably. Docks that normally sat level with the water were now elevated above the surface. Boats that had been floating peacefully were beginning to settle onto the lake bottom in shallow areas. I positioned myself on my property with binoculars and a folding chair, ready to watch the show that was about to unfold across the lake. The HOA and resort development were about to discover that their $12 million investment had been built on a foundation they never bothered to understand. The first signs of panic came around 8:30. I could see people walking out onto docks that were now several feet above the water line, pointing and gesturing with obvious confusion. Boats were stranded in what had been deep water just hours before. By 10 in the morning, the crisis was in full swing. The resort's beautiful lakefront views were transforming into muddy flats dotted with stranded watercraft. The marina that had been advertised as a luxury amenity was now a collection of docks sitting high and dry above puddles of water. That is when Patricia Whitman arrived. I watched through my binoculars as her white BMW pulled up to what used to be the resort's lakefront pavilion. She climbed out wearing a business suit and high heels completely inappropriate for walking on muddy lake bottom, but she was clearly too panicked to care about fashion. She stood at the edge of what had been pristine water just hours before, holding her phone to her ear and gesturing wildly at the disaster unfolding around her. Even from across the lake, I could see her distress as she realized her multi-million-dollar investment was turning into worthless swampland. Around noon, she appeared at my property line with two men in suits and expressions of barely controlled rage. I walked down to meet them, carrying copies of all my water rights documents and feeling calmer than I had in months. "Mr. Morrison, what have you done to our lake?" Patricia demanded, her professional composure finally cracking. "I have exercised my family's legal water rights for property maintenance purposes, as authorized by documents dating back to 1890. Everything I have done is completely legal and within historical precedent." One of the men stepped forward, probably a lawyer. "Sir, you cannot simply drain a lake that supports millions of dollars in property development. We will have you arrested for vandalism and property destruction." I handed him copies of the water rights documents and my great-grandfather's engineering manual. "I suggest you review these before making legal threats. My family built this dam and retained perpetual water rights as compensation. Your resort was built without researching the legal foundation that makes lakefront property valuable." Patricia's face went pale as she realized the implications. "You are saying you can just drain the lake whenever you want?" "I am saying I have legal authority to manage water levels for legitimate property purposes. Given that your HOA destroyed my family bridge and made my property nearly inaccessible, I determined that lowering water levels was necessary to protect my interests and explore alternative access options." The lawyer was frantically reading through the historical documents, his expression growing more worried with each page. "These appear to be legitimate water rights deeds. If they are authentic, this could be legally defensible." Patricia stared at the muddy wasteland that had been her pristine lake view just that morning. Millions of dollars in resort property and vacation homes were now overlooking what looked like a disaster zone. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. That was the question I had been waiting for. "What I want is simple," I told Patricia Whitman as we stood at the edge of my property, looking out over the drained lake that had been her empire just hours before. "I want my family bridge rebuilt exactly as it was, with a permanent legal easement protecting it from any future HOA interference. I want full compensation for my legal fees and the emotional damage caused by your illegal destruction of family property. And I want a formal apology acknowledging that your actions were wrong." The lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, probably explaining that fighting me in court would be expensive and uncertain, while the resort was losing money every hour the lake remained drained. "And if we agree to your terms, you will restore normal water levels." "I will restore the lake to its natural state as soon as we have a signed agreement and my bridge reconstruction begins. The water rights will remain in my family permanently, as they have for over a century." Patricia looked around at the muddy disaster that surrounded us, calculating the cost of her pride against the value of her investment. Resort guests were checking out in droves. Property buyers were canceling contracts. Her beautiful lakefront development was becoming a cautionary tale about the importance of researching water rights before building. Within a week, I had everything I wanted: a signed legal agreement guaranteeing permanent protection for my bridge, a check covering all legal fees plus damages for emotional distress, and a written apology acknowledging that the HOA had overstepped their authority in destroying family property. The bridge reconstruction began immediately, using the same design and materials my grandfather had chosen decades earlier. But this time, Every beam and plank was protected by legal documentation that no future HOA could challenge. I took special satisfaction in slowly reopening the dam gates and watching the lake refill over several days. The water returned gradually, allowing the resort time to clean up the mess and repair their damaged marina. But everyone in the community now understood who really controlled Crystal Lake. The HOA dissolved within 3 months. Patricia Whitman resigned in disgrace and left the area entirely. The resort development company restructured their entire marketing strategy around historic lakefront properties with traditional charm, suddenly celebrating the same rustic character they had tried to destroy. Property values actually increased after the incident, as potential buyers realized they were purchasing land with real history and protection from future development overreach. The story of David versus the corporate Goliath became local legend, inspiring other property owners to research their own rights and stand up to HOA bullying. 6 months later, I was having my morning coffee on the new bridge, watching sunrise paint the lake in shades of gold and pink just like always. The wooden planks creaked under my feet with that familiar, comforting sound that meant home and family and roots that run deeper than corporate profits. Old Mr. Peterson puttered by in his fishing boat, waving from the water just like he had for decades. The Johnson family was back on their dock across the cove. Children were swimming off the rocks again, their laughter echoing across the water that my great-grandfather had engineered and my family had protected. The lake looked exactly the same as it had before the HOA invasion, but everything was different now. I had learned that sometimes the little guy can win, but only if he fights smart and knows his rights. I had discovered that family history is not just sentimental stories, but real legal power that can stand up to corporate bullies with deep pockets. Most importantly, I had proven that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how impossible the odds might seem. My grandfather's bridge stood strong again, protected by law and defended by knowledge that stretched back over a century. Every morning when I cross those weathered planks, I think about the generations who walked here before me and the generations who will walk here after I am gone. This bridge is not just transportation. It is proof that family legacy, combined with preparation and determination, can overcome any HOA that tries to bulldoze its way through history. Some battles are won with lawyers, some are won with money, but the most important battles are won with patience, research, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for.